Hello and welcome to Schema Stories. My name is Martha Van Berkel and I'm the CEO at Schema App. And I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Steve Macbeth at Microsoft. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No problem. Well, let's jump right in. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started with schema.org.
I'm a long-term Microsoft employee. I run a small incubation engineering team right now, but I've been with the company since 2002. And most of my work has been in the AI space, natural language, speech. And I started in search, which at the time was MSN search, in 2006. And I went to China for 3 years to start a development center there. And during that time, we supported many search features, primarily in structured data. And so I got a lot of experience kind of being a consumer of structured data. And at the time, there wasn't very good structured data on the web. And so we had to build a lot of technology to convert largely unstructured data into structured data in order to power features like vertical search. And so that was kind of my introduction. And then when I came back from China, I ended up running the Bing core relevance team. And that was when I wanted to try to solve the structured data problem more systemically than scraping the web and converting unstructured into structured data. So that's kind of a bit of a background on me. Yeah.
And so you were there right at the very beginning, right in the inception. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, Guha, who was, I guess, the original founder, who works at Google, he came to visit Microsoft in, I guess, maybe 2009, I think. I should have looked at the timeline before the call, and basically proposed this idea of having Bing and Google and Yahoo at the time collaborate on building a schema that we would kind of endorse. And it was aligned with work I had been doing already, and I think I addressed a number of challenges we were seeing. And so the opportunity to do that at an industry level and partner with Google, and Yahoo seemed like a great opportunity. I mean, we weren't and aren't the leaders in search. And so I think whenever you're not the leader and the leader wants to do standards work, it's always beneficial to
Awesome.
participate.
In those very early days, were there any kind of key areas of schema.org that you were really passionate about or really pushed for to be included in the schema.org vocabulary?
Well, when we originally started, there wasn't a lot of, I mean, we took a very kind of noun focused perspective, which was, how do we capture a bunch of the nouns that people are searching for, movies and locations and things like that, and books and products, and provide some structure around them. For me, I've always been very interested in the kind of action side of the web, and I have particularly been starting to look a lot at mobile search and the relationship between how actions get linked to in the mobile space. And so the whole action extensions we did, and this was probably 2 years after we had originally launched the original schema.org work, we started to add actions, and that was the area that I would say I was most interested in, and I still see the most opportunity, although I don't think we've ever made as much progress there as we have in the noun space, but I would love to see more progress.
One of the drivers we've been talking about, especially enterprise looking at actions, is that if you define them on the website, a chatbot can then understand the action it can do on the page, right? So as a business driver for looking at defining those actions, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this is a really, I think the struggle with all of this kind of markup is that there's a catch-22, which is that publishers have limited resources. They're only going to mark up where there's value in marking up. And consumers of markup will only build features where there's lots of markup. And so if there's no markup in an area, then no one builds features. And if there's no features, then no one does markup. And this has always been the biggest struggle, I think, in this space. And so I think the more people can think of ways to use the existing markup, this is always better. So I love the idea that that bots are starting to consume some of the existing markup and use that to be smarter and to drive value.
Love it. Very broad question. The semantic web is something, those of us that are sort of semantic technologists get really excited about. But especially as you sort of look at the AI components of things, like, why are you passionate about the semantic web, and kind of where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two aspects. One is like personality wise, why am I interested? I'm an order person. I like things to be orderly, and the non-semantic web is a very disorganized place. Unstructured text is very disorganized, and so I think the organizer in me likes the idea of clean lines and well-connected lines and lots of semantic meaning in relationships. And so that's kind of like my personality is predisposed to wanting to organize things. And I think semantic markup is an outlet for that kind of, I don't know if it's a personality flaw or a strength, but
We love it. Our mission is to translate the world's content to be understood by machines. Which in otherwise is like we want to organize the web,
right,
right?
right.
So we're right there with you. We follow it.
And then I think from a practical perspective, my work, I'm not in the Bing team anymore. I don't work directly on search. I'm more in the broad AI space. And in fact, there was just a big reorg announced today at Microsoft that changes my team's charter slightly into more of the AI perception space. So we've been merged with a number of other teams doing things like vision and speech. And my team is doing computer vision. And I definitely, well, there's not a direct relationship right now. I do think longer term, the like AR and VR and how they interact with the semantic web is super important. And it provides this opportunity to, like, as you view or interact with stuff in the real world, the ability to connect to semantic meaning around that information, I think becomes super important. And I think there's a lot of rich experiences that could be built if you could connect an item you see in the real world with the digital counterpart to that item and its relationships and its actions. And so, well, I think this is very nascent area for the semantic web. I think the connection, for me, the interesting thing now is really how to connect the digital world and the physical world. And I think this is now semantic meaning, I think maybe is the fabric in which we can connect those two things. And you see this already with mapping, like
Yep.
maps didn't have latitude and longitude. You couldn't connect a map to the physical world, but maps are deeply semantic, in their design. And so they're very easy to stitch together with the real world. Most data on the web, because it doesn't have that kind of semantic backbone, it's much more difficult to connect to the real world. And so we tend to use the map as the mechanism to connect it. I'm looking at this restaurant, not because I know that this is the restaurant, but because I know that on the map, this location has this restaurant, and in the real world, am I at that location? So the map kind of becomes the interface between the real world and the digital world. I think we
Yep.
need
Love that.
more interfaces between the digital world and the real world.
Mm. And yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like where we're seeing today, like, all that work around images, right? And sort of connecting the images to the knowledge graph, let's call
Mm-hmm.
it. You're sort of saying take it a step further and make it so it's actually like our human experience of seeing,
Yeah, yeah,
connecting to that knowledge graph. Love that.
yeah,
I love how you're sort of painting for that next step, that next piece of
yeah.
why we should be building this foundation. Can you, we talked about Bing, and there's been lots of conversation about Bing recently just because we're seeing it consume JSON-LD, which it has been, taking a bit longer than Google to consume or show evidence of supporting JSON-LD. Can you talk a little bit about how Bing uses schema.org and entities? And I know that's not your primary team, but maybe just make some comments on that.
Yeah, so let me first give you a caveat, which is anything I say might be incorrect. And if it is, I apologize because I am not as involved day to day with that work as I used to be. I think there's a few areas where Bing consumes the data, but mostly it's through our object repository. So we have an entity repository called Satori. I think this is public knowledge. That is a place where all of the entities Bing knows about are stored. And that entity database is used obviously to drive many features in Bing. Relevance features, there's ad components to that, there's rich like vertical search features that leverage that data to do rich captions and filtering and these kinds of features. But more and more other products are starting to take advantage of that too. Enterprise functionality is starting to look at, how can I take a customer's catalog and then bind that to the web graph. And again, I don't think this is any different than the conversation we were having earlier, which is, finding these connection points. Like if I have a catalog and in that catalog is a bunch of products, how do I bind that to sentiment on the web? Well, in order to do that, I need to find some connective tissue that says, okay, well, this product in your catalog is the same as this product people are talking about on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or wherever, or writing reviews on the web. And so for us, Satori is this kind of connecting fabric that says, we know the names of things because people search for the names of things. We know the canonical web address of things, and then we have all the structured data about those things. And so we can use natural words and, well-known IDs as that connecting fabric. So the main way that Microsoft consumes and uses structured data is through Satori.
Got it. So would Satori be like the equivalent to Google's knowledge graph? Like if we were
Yes.
sort of to use those language?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yep.
I think that's a great way for people to kind of connect those dots and speak sort of the Microsoft language instead of always the Google language.
But a much sexier name. So
Yeah,
less
and you've put me in contact with the Satori team, so maybe I'll be
yeah.
able to get them on here to have a similar conversation. Talk to me a little bit about AI. So you're sort of in the VR space. You talked about like that connecting pieces. Like, do you see any other sort of AI experiences emerging in the near term?
Well, that is a very, very broad question. Yes, I mean, I think there's, there we have a event at Microsoft called TechFest, which is just ending. TechFest is a 3-day event where researchers generally showcase the work they've done. And then anybody at Microsoft and some press can come through and see it. It's kind of like a science fair. And so it's always a good opportunity to kind of see what's going on. I would say a majority of the booths at TechFest this year were AI related or leveraging AI or making it easier to build AI. So I think there's a huge focus in the company and in the industry on, how can we use AI to make software better? I think AI is there will become a time where nobody talks about AI because, AI in some ways is like object-oriented programming. Like nobody talks about, are there more object-oriented features coming out? Because it's a tool to build real-world things. And right now it's novel, and so it's a way to differentiate, like object-oriented was 15 years ago. And so I think in another 5 years, maybe less, people will stop talking about AI products because every product will have some aspects of AI in it.
Is there something that was at TechFest that stood out to you that kind of got you excited?
It's all proprietary, so I can't really
Sorry.
share. I think there's a lot of stuff in the VR space that I'm like excited about personally. I went to Ready Player One last night, and so I kind of love VR in the VR space. There's work in haptic feedback, which I think is really exciting. And so, I think for me, that area is super exciting, and kind of the overlap between AI and semantic data, like we talked about, and AR. I'm a big believer that in the near future, maybe 10 years, everybody will use some form of augmented reality through glasses or contacts or something like that.
Excellent. Well, Thank you so much for being part of today and sharing that vision, especially of that I'll say like that bleeding line between reality and sort of the connected graphs of things. To me, that was a new idea of how we sort of see the evolution. If people want to get in touch with you or to sort of follow your thinking or the work that you're doing, how do they get in touch with you?
I mean, they can just email me. I'm on LinkedIn, Steve Macbeth. If you just search for Steve Macbeth Microsoft on LinkedIn, you can find me. But my email address at Microsoft is just steve.macbeth. And so if anybody wants to reach out, happy to do that. I think my stuff's also on the schema.org website somewhere. So
I think
um,
that's where I found you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then can I just add one? I think we had talked about one other question which you I think didn't answer, but I had an answer for,
Go for it.
which is like, what could people who are doing semantic markup do? Like to me, the thing we talked about earlier, which is create connection points, is like
Mhm.
the most important, because semantics is better than no semantics.
Mm.
But semantics without the ability to connect to other data is almost, you know, as valueless as no semantics. I mean, semantic data is only valuable, in my opinion, when it can be bridged to other data. And so
Oh, I
the
love
more,
that. Yeah, we talk about like islands of code
yeah,
versus like
yeah,
actually building a graph, right? Like,
yeah,
is
yeah,
that
yeah,
sort of what you mean?
exactly, exactly. And so I think the more you can think about, okay, I've just marked up this entity on my page or this action. What is the mechanism that can be related to other things? And so I think Wikipedia forms a very nice backbone for canonical IDs. We very early in the formation of schema.org, we made a strong decision, which was not to support canonical IDs.
Mm.
Um, and I think it was an important thing because it would have been very politically contentious at the time, to support it, because we basically would have had to pick somebody's ID system
Mhm.
to have canonical IDs. I think the time has come for canonical ideas, so I would love to see schema.org or some other organization take on canonical IDs. But the more you can think about, like, what is the canonical ID for this entity? Is it Latin long? And this can be a good canonical ID.
Mhm.
Um, is it binding back to Wikipedia, which I think can form this kind of backbone of canonical IDs? Is,
Mhm.
ISBN can be that for certain types of data, but like just thinking about what is the mechanism that this can be connected to other IDs, and then I think for the future, like, how can it connect to the real world? And so I think like
Mm.
QR codes in semantics is seems like a really weird idea, I think, on the surface, but I think will become more and more important because it's
Mm.
the
Interesting.
mechanism in which you can basically allow people to,
Touch.
in the physical world, interact with your semantic data, in the same way that I think lat long allow that. So
Oh, so
um,
interesting.
yeah, so I just wanted to kind of throw that last bit out.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I was, it's something that like we at Schema App are really true believers in is sort of that sort of connecting your data and defining it wherever that definition is, right? And as there's more also groups coming out, whether it be data commons or open data, sort of defining those things for different groups or different entity themes. How do we sort of continue to encourage people, even at a very basic level, if you're a small business, right? Defining your city by the Wikidata entry for that city, et cetera. There's very simple ways that you can start making those connections.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we've been sort of marching that with you, Steve, trying
Great.
to get even the earliest adopters of schema.org to be thinking about that connections or paths sort of between things to make sure that they're connected. Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. I loved that last thought. Thanks for adding that in. And again, you can find Steve on LinkedIn. I'll also share his LinkedIn and email sort of within the post, and so people can find him there. Again, thank you, Steve, for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, and for your continued support in schema.org. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.